15, an age where we learn to drive a car for the first time. When we enter high school, or as Taylor Swift might say, life before you know who you're going to be. 15 is an age of innocence. On February 11th, 2021, I was 15 years old and I did not go to school that day. Instead, I walked into a hospital. My doctor told me that I would not be going home that night or to school the next day or be playing volleyball that weekend. Just 2 months after I turned 15 years old, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa and admitted to Children's Hospital Colorado. My body was beginning to go into preservation mode. My heart rate had dropped to 35 beats per minute, and my blood pressure was dangerously low. For months leading up to being admitted, I was consumed by thoughts of food, calories, weight, and numbers. My mom had spent the nights before I was admitted laying on my chest, listening to my heartbeat, making sure that her teenage daughter was still alive. My dad had spent the night before I was admitted in the car with me, begging me to finish a protein shake after volleyball practice. My obsession all started with my goal of glowing up during the quarantine of March 2020. I told myself that I wanted to be more healthy and I wanted to tone up my body. So I started eating less and I exercised more. I started to lose weight, and the satisfaction that I got from watching that scale drop only motivated me more. I started to eliminate entire food groups, and I avoided social settings where I feared encountering unplanned food. I grew addicted to the sense of control that food had gave me. By November 2020, I visited my doctor due to a consistent drop in my blood pressure and dizziness. By January 2021, my dad took me to a dietitian in attempts to address my malnourishment. Upon seeing my declining growth charts, the dietitian sent me home with some protein shakes. But none of this seemed to interrupt the path I was walking. I wanted to be more beautiful, and in my mind, that meant being smaller. I thought that if my waist matched the measurements of a runway model, I would pose more value in this world. I wanted to shrink myself to be more digestible for others. My disordered eating habits had turned into an eating disorder. By February of 2021, when I was finally admitted to the hospital, it was evident that I could no longer survive life living the way that I was. I entered an outpatient psychiatric program following my 2-week inpatient stay. In program, I was surrounded by peers who were just like me, pressured by societal standards, personal expectations, and controlled by their fixation of food and numbers. When I entered this program at just 15 years old, I was one of the oldest patients there. I ended up spending about 3 months in this program before being discharged from treatment. So why am I telling you this? I'm not just telling you my story so that you feel a certain way or so that you see me differently. I'm up here because, whether or not you want to see it, eating disorders impact so many people of all ages, genders, and body types, not just the stereotypical teenage girl like me. It's more than a physical condition in that it really strikes the brain. It's an addiction to the behaviors and the control associated with it. My story is not unique. Over 28.8 million Americans will be diagnosed with an eating disorder in their lifetime. If you look around you, surrounded by 1,300 other people, 117 of these people will be diagnosed with an eating disorder in their lifetime. And these statistics only address those who are diagnosed with an eating disorder. And the percentage of those who have an eating disorder has doubled in the past few years. And the percentage of children under 12 who are diagnosed with an eating disorder has grown by 119% in the last decade. Eating disorders are an epidemic that needs to be better addressed. We live in a world that allows eating disorders to develop and thrive. Everywhere you look, and in every piece of media you consume, you'll find that we are surrounded by advertisements and content that promotes weight loss, or maybe getting that hourglass figure, or maybe getting abs in 2 weeks. Our language is filled with diet culture terms that target our physical and emotional insecurities. At work, you might hear someone talking about how they skip breakfast or maybe their cheat day. And while we might not think twice about this type of language or behavior, I have some news for you. Your cheat day is BS. Your cheat day is glorified disordered behavior. We don't think twice about these terms, and we accept them because we've normalized them. But what's not normal is to associate self-worth with food. By beginning to label foods as good or bad, unhealthy or healthy, we take on a disordered eating mindset. This mindset extends to our bodies as well. We might find ourselves labeling things about our bodies that we like or we don't like. This was the reality of my eating disorder. I let a popular phrase guide my diet. You are what you eat. This phrase that seems so simple also guided my value. I told myself that my diet reflected my worth, and it continued to show that with the less I ate, the less I had valued myself. I was terrified of many of the foods that I had labeled bad, and I sobbed over them when having to eat them in recovery out of fear. By eating those foods, I didn't value myself because my value was only tied to my size. I found comfort in the foods that I had labeled good, and I associated positive morale with them. By eating those foods, I was a better person with better self-esteem. This type of mindset is common for those with eating disorders, but also common for those struggling with anxiety, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and other mental health conditions. So I learned that this way of thinking is called dichotomous thinking, or black and white thinking. So how do we escape this mindset? It's not easy. For me in recovery, I couldn't truly heal until I chose recovery for myself, which unfortunately wasn't until long after I was discharged from treatment. I had to completely rewrite my thinking processes and give up the control that I thought I had. I had to let go of the emotions that came up when I saw foods that were good or bad, and eventually dismiss those words altogether. By removing extremes, such as words like good, bad, always, or never, it became easier to reframe my thoughts and look at things as they are, rather than forcing them into the categories that society had made for me and I had made for myself. Over time, food became just food again, and eventually, I found balance. I was able to let go of the phrase, you are what you eat. My diet no longer determined my self-worth. One thing that we need to learn to grow our relationships with ourselves is that there is no good without things that are labeled bad, and vice versa. So without one another, they do not exist. By removing good and bad morale and associations with different things, it creates balance. By taking away the black and white, we can live in a world of gray, of neutrality, and find that the most colorful lives can be lived in a world of gray. By removing the extremes from our lives, we can live in equilibrium and begin to reach a world of acceptance with ourselves, our bodies, and our decisions. Let's circle back around my original quote. You are what you eat. If we take away such aggressive meaning from anecdotes like this, it becomes what we started with, simple. It is not good or bad, or unhealthy or healthy. It just is. So if there's anything I want you to take away from this, know that you are more than the foods that you consume or the decisions you make, and you are defined by more than what you can control. And remember, you are more than what you eat. Thank you.